So my name is Sasha. I'll go first. I'm the founder of Workflow, an employee experience design agency headquartered out of Singapore. I look across the design strategy and delivery elements of anything employee experience related. And as I said, I'm delighted to be here with Alana and Jerome, who I will let introduce themselves. So Alana, do you want to go first?
Thanks, Sasha. Hi, everyone. My name's Alana, and I'm a self-proclaimed human experience fanatic and coach. I founded my own business right at the start of COVID, which I think it's fair to say that having a global pandemic did not exist in my business plan. And since then, I've definitely added to my skill set. I'm now a homeschooler, a peacekeeper. I can juggle. I've definitely been residing in Melbourne and being under kind of stage 4 lockdown. I've definitely adding some extra tools to my belt, which no doubt will assist from an experience perspective. I have a real passion around the emotional experience. So a lot of the work that I'm doing is not only looking at what does the experience look like, but what does it look like from this perspective of emotion, which, I think COVID has really heightened this. Sasha, you referred to the emotion of where people are at right now. And so this is really in the forefront of a lot of organisations' mind. Really, really happy to be here and have this conversation.
Awesome. Jerome, what about you?
Thanks, Sasha, and thanks, Alana, for the intro. So yes, my name is Jerome. I've got several years of employee experience, design, strategy design, etc. So of course, both public and private sector here in Australia. So yes, a huge advocate of employee experience, what it can bring to the organization, but also to customer experience. And just the engagement with the organization overall. So obviously, the last 6 months have been quite significant when it comes to employee experience and the impact that COVID would have had on employee experience. So yeah, challenging time, but also exciting times, because that's a great opportunity to see how organizations have actually managed the crisis and managed the relationship with their employees. So very excited to be here today to talk about it.
Awesome. So I think it's fair to say it's been a tough time for everyone, especially large organizations. And I know we all have experience of working with big organizations or for big organizations right now. So maybe like Alana, Jerome, what are you talking about in the EX space at the moment?
Shall I kick off?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Alana.
So I think what's really interesting is we've seen, the pandemic impact the experience agenda is it's no longer around, that workplace design, so what are the spaces that we want our people to experience, the organisation, foosball tables, free lunches, free breakfast, yoga, we all know that that's not just what experience is about, but I think that is a lot of perception around what experience is about, and that no longer exists anymore. So there's definitely, this drive towards this really humane focus. What are the needs and wants of the people in my business? And I think, as we've seen, with the George Floyd, experiences, obviously we're really seeing this diversity, equity, inclusion agenda come to the forefront of experience now. So I think we've also got this additional lens that we're looking at experience, both in terms of this emotional human need perspective, but also this diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think they're two really big themes that I'm speaking to a lot of people about. Yeah,
definitely. I think it's been quite the year. And so from an experience perspective, we're not just looking at that remote experience. It's also, as you say, everything around diversity, equity, and inclusion. So Jerome, what do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. So diversity and inclusion is something that keeps on coming up. Other things that keeps on coming up is the engagement of employees. Obviously, their motivation has kind of dropped with COVID. They've seen a lot of their colleagues leaving the organization by choice or not by choice. And it's about realigning these employees to the purpose of the organization and take into consideration this new mindset and new ways of doing things. So how organizations are going to work to keep their employees engaged and as aligned to the purpose as possible in this new environment. And that's some of the things I've seen recently.
Yeah, I think the other thing that I've seen at kind of an uptake in conversations around has been performance. So immediately everyone rushed to talking about onboarding, and then it was reboarding, and how do we manage emergency response or gathering health related data and building platforms around that. And now it's kind of like, okay, BAU, how do we get around to our performance review? Because a lot of them are calendar year related. And I find that quite interesting, because as much as the fundamentals of performance review, would pretty much stay the same, it's like, how do you manage that review process remotely?
I couldn't agree with you more. I also think part of the challenge and therefore opportunities, there's probably a lot of process that organisations moved to really quickly in the pandemic, thinking that maybe we'll be in this period for a month. Certainly in Melbourne, we've all been home since kind of February, March. So that's a far period of time, which now I think, because we've got more time now, we're actually starting to look at what's the right design of the process with this experience lens to actually make sure that, Jerome, to your point, we're getting great engagement, but actually it's adding value to the people that are experiencing that process. I don't think there's anyone, and maybe I'm being controversial, but I don't think there's anyone that says, we get to kind of quarterly performance review process and people are like, yes, I can't wait, right? I just don't know that there's many of us that are kind of doing that. So I think we've got this massive opportunity in front of us to be saying, in the way in which we're connecting and engaging our employees, how do we design this better? How do we design it in a way in which it adds value to both the leaders that have got to run the process, but the employees who have to experience it as well?
Well, and the other thing is that because people had to work from home, in a way, the mindset when it comes to performance management and all these things linked to the performance has had to change. So in the past, a lot of leaders, managers were relying on seeing their employees at their desk to make sure they were doing their work. They're at their desk for 45 hours a week. They must be doing a great job. Now they're actually relying on the outputs that these employees actually deliver working from home. So the way performance is being measured is based on what people produce. Whether they produce it in 20 hours, then it's good, so they can do more things or do more things on the side, as opposed to just being at a desk for 40 hours and the organization thinking that they're doing a great job because they are there constantly. So I think this change in mindset is quite good as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So let's jump into the case studies, back to the topic of, I guess, talent acquisition and employer brand. So let me just pull open a slide deck, move it over very slick. So can you see case study company A? Let me know.
Yep.
Perfect.
Yep.
Okay, so as I said, a reminder, all of these companies are fictional, but I'm sure you can imagine these are very real challenges. So company A is a large organization headquartered in Asia, and they were hit hard and fast by the pandemic. They had no option but to reduce operations by almost 70% and were forced to make some tough decisions to protect the business. Within a matter of weeks, hundreds of jobs were lost. Many employees took to social media to share the news, expressing their shock and disappointment while seeking new opportunities. The media also published several articles emphasising the number of retrenchments, with quotes from previous employees. The HR team have been asked to start preparing a hiring strategy for early 2021 based on current forecasts. How might they navigate this challenge, and what role will EX play in the process? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen because anti-PowerPoints here. But yeah, guys, what do you think? And also in the chat, please let us know if you've come across kind of a similar challenge or you're going through something similar at the moment. What do you think?
Go on, Jerome. I'm going to let you start.
All right. Thank you. Look, I think that's a very interesting case study, interesting challenge, because a lot of companies that have been in this situation, whether Southeast Asia or all around the world. Now, from what I can see is that this organization didn't necessarily manage the exit in the first place. So they probably took a reactive approach as opposed to a more strategic approach to just make the tough decision to protect the business as quickly as possible, but without necessarily thinking about the impacts. So now looking forward, what can this company do to attract talent, people? So I think one thing that could be or should be looked at is the role of the board. We don't really talk about the role of the board in this situation, but a company that handles a situation like this should, and some people should be held accountable. Now, the board should have full visibility on how the way things are being managed, the type of culture that's in the organization. Now, an organization that acts this way without really thinking about the employees or the experience the employees go through, the culture is probably not great. So I think increasing the role of the board to ensuring that the culture is what should be expected from an organization now in 2020, ensuring that there are proper monitoring measurements in place to make sure that the employees are relatively engaged, but also satisfied with the culture in the workplace. I would encourage the HR team to also develop a in-depth people plan to understand the type of talent they need, the quantity of talent they need, and how they're going to keep them, well, first to attract them, but also retain them. So understanding the type of experiences or benefits that people are currently looking for. They're not necessarily looking for a high salary package. Now, obviously with COVID, a lot of the remuneration has been readjusted. So people are not going to ask or require a high salary. So you have to be also very realistic there. So you have to be able to offer something else. So what will be the experience and benefits that come with working with the organization beyond just the money. Looking at also the type of people that are now constituting our workforce. A lot of them would be millennials, tech savvy, digital generation, etc. So it's also ensuring that the business delivers on people's expectations when it comes to technologies and digital solutions. So that could be a start. Obviously, EX plays across all the cultures, the technology, but also the environment. Now, we're not necessarily thinking about a building or a physical workspace. It's offering people the opportunity to work as flexibly as they possibly can or want as well. So there's quite a bit of work for Company A to do. And in a way, it's almost starting from scratch. I almost see it as reading a new organization. So reviewing the culture, reviewing the type of leaders that are part of the organization, and also reviewing the way things are being done to make sure that the right people are attracted, but also stay with the organization.
I came at it from a slightly different angle, so I totally agree with all of your points around kind of like the board involvement, because when I saw so many LinkedIn posts from people saying, I'm really shocked, I'm out in the market, I'm looking for a job, can you help? I was a bit like, I really feel like HR are going to take the brunt of a lot of that. And it's not, and to be clear, if it's a rapid business decision, you have to execute quickly. And, I understand that pressure, absolutely. I think for me, I put, from a talent attraction perspective, is really kind of owning what's happened and kind of looking at it from like an honesty and authenticity perspective. So if you're going out to market and you know that you need to be hiring again, it's kind of really taking the time to consider what message are we putting out in the hiring campaign. And for me, I wrote as well, like it kind of has to be less about, the business. And I think so much of the marketing content that we've seen from businesses going through, like struggling at the moment, is about the business surviving and serving customers and less about employees. And I think, a very subtle shift in that will really have, benefit employer brand. I think the other thing that I touched on here with my notes was reaching out to the alumni or the people that you have offboarded. I think mistakes might have been made, right? And I think we're all in agreement there. Some organizations did it really well, and other organizations made a bunch of cuts and then still paid their exec board millions of dollars, right? So we know that that's happened. I don't think that relationship has stopped. And I think there is an opportunity for organizations to reach out to their old employees who may still be looking for work to say, look, we want to offer you some support. We realise it was a really quick decision, owning it, as I said, and then, you know, keeping them engaged and saying, look, in the future, we're looking to rehire. We would love to keep the conversation going, and kind of starting that as kind of an alumni program, but also repairing some of that damage. I don't know.
Yeah.
I like key things.
Yeah, look, I absolutely agree with the sentiment of both of your views on this, and I think, you know, we've got some chat with Andrew and Jen that are definitely kind of in agreement with us as well. I think, you know, the biggest thing for me is you've got to face the music. You know, that candidates aren't stupid. The first place that they're going to go to research your organisation is online. And if there's stuff in the media, they will absolutely find it. So, you know, there's this balance around actually kind of acknowledging what took place. But really importantly, you know, how are they going to respond to it? And I think it's okay that we have to, you know, we have to remember we're coming from this position from an employment branding where I think we've moved on from the days of everyone jumping up and down and shouting about how great our organisations are. Like, I think those days are gone. Well, I certainly hope they are. I think now, you know, we're seeing much more balanced view when we talk about, when, you know, organisations are talking about their employment brand. And so I think that's got to continue, and it's got to continue in the face of what do we know now, and what do we want to be, and what are some things we're working on, you know, to get there. And I think we've got to really have this, you know, humanistic lens to how we talk about our employment brand from that perspective, because what a candidate is doing on the outside is looking in and saying, how will I fit in that organisation? How will I navigate the organisation if I'm in there? How will it align with my values? Even when, you know, we talk about the struggles is, you know, I think it's interesting when, you know, when you do employment brand research is quite often when you talk to people, employees, about what's great about this organisation, sometimes it's come, or I think a large time it's come from struggle. You know, we have these really great moments because we've had these huge growth from these experiences. So, you know, kind of the two go hand in hand. So I think this really balanced view around where we are, where we need to get to, and how we get there. And also acknowledging that not everyone has to love your employee experience from a brand perspective, and that's okay. In fact, you know, be strategic about this and look at it as another filter for, you know, I'm sure that recruitment teams would much prefer having, you know, candidates that are aligning from a values perspective than having to do more filtering, particularly in the environment we're in now, where we know that there's, you know, high levels of unemployment, you know, across, you know, globally. And I think lastly, I would just add to that is, you know, we've got to continue to tell human stories in our employment branding. So, you know, that I think that, you know, starts to bring that authenticity to life.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. And I think Andrew and Jem have agreed with us in that space, you know, acknowledging the past and building a campaign for the future that's positive. Interestingly, Matthew has put in the chat here, the candidate experience is a really good starting point. So, and I totally agree with you, Matthew, like this, understanding the impact that talent acquisitions team have at the moment is key, because I think when before we set this up, one of the things we spoke about was employee trauma, right?
Yes.
So if you've been let go by an organisation and you're out in the market looking for a new job, and your senses are just going to be so heightened, and you're going to be super sensitive, because there are tons of factors that mean you have to get a job, and it's, you know, there might be a real sense of urgency. And that candidate experience is so key.
Absolutely.
What do you guys think?
Yeah, and look, it's absolutely the experience will be key. It's also putting it to the context of COVID. The organization will have let the employees go in a almost saturated market. So it's also for them to understand the challenges that the employees are facing or will be facing in the future. And I think that's Andrew mentioned this, acknowledging what has happened. And I think it's a very, very good and fair point that organizations should also acknowledge that maybe they didn't handle the situation the right way. Now, there's no better way of doing things, but there is a wrong way. And a way where there is no engagement or involvement in some of the decision making, it could be the wrong way. Now, I take as an example Domain here in Australia. They obviously dealt with the real estate industry and got impacted by COVID, but they actually engaged their employees to understand what would be the best option. They didn't want to get rid of everybody. But they actually ask the employees, so what do you think would be best? They've developed a range of initiative of options, and they asked employees what would work best for them. And that's definitely an organization that rates quite high, at least for me, and for employees working there already, and future talent who would be interested in joining the organization because of the way they dealt with it. Yeah.
No,
I sorry.
No, I was just going to say a few bits in the chat. I was going to get you to see.
Yes, I've just seen Gem's comment, which I was just about to talk to as well. So Gem's made a comment around, what are the right hiring measures that we need, that need to go, what's more important now, and, how do we show more respect and care via the candidate experience? And I just couldn't agree more. And I have to admit, I get a little bit of bee in my bonnet when I talk about candidate experience, because I just think there is absolutely no excuse to not to respond to candidates at all. I just don't think there's an excuse at all. I think it says so much about your brand, and we are seeing so much of this now. It's soul destroying, frankly. And I think we've got to be really careful, these candidates are also our consumers. Now, depending on what your business is, don't be fooled. We've all made decisions about how we've been treated as a consumer that will relate to whether we would work for that organisation, right? So don't be fooled. It works the same way in reverse. I think that there are employers that are thinking that this is their game now. They can hire who they want. They can pay them what they want. And I've heard employers say, I paid less because I can. Now, that just makes me cringe. This is about actually valuing the candidate's skills, experience, and their unique potential that they bring to your business, and that's what we hire for. It isn't about because there's 200 people that have applied for my job, I can get it for $10,000 cheaper. I mean, it's just madness. So I think I couldn't agree more. I think we're not measuring the right things within the whole of HR that focus on experience, and therefore we're focusing on the wrong things as part of that. What gets measured obviously gets done, right? So I think it's a really great point, and I could probably talk for an hour just about these. So take control, Sasha, before we
it's all right. So
we diverged.
I'll share the next case study, and Rob, you made a really valid point, which I will come on to talk about with case study B. So let me just share this. So here we go, nice and slick again. So Company B is a smallish organisation headquartered in Asia. They experienced a major decline in client bookings as a result of the pandemic, and in order to protect cash flow, the business had to make some tough decisions. Between April and July of this year, 24% of employees were retrenched. The process was smooth, and the organisation provided a generous exit support package. Many of the retrenched employees took to social media to praise the business for offering support despite the circumstance. Now, with the easing of restrictions locally, they're seeing an uptake in bookings and want to reach out to retrenched employees to see if they'd be willing to return. How do we approach this challenge? So, Jerome, what do you think?
Okay. Look, I think this is a totally different position than the one we had earlier. Now, it seems that this situation is relatively positive. Obviously, employees lost their job, but the way it was managed was a lot better. So the organization might have not broken the relationship with the employees, and that's key if you want to keep engaged with them and reattract them. So if I was the organization, I would, yes, reach out to employees that have been retrenched, but also the alumni, so people who have worked in the organization before this COVID crisis, who left the organization not through retrenchment but other means. So I think the key thing here is really leveraging the way the organization has handled the crisis. So we talked about employer branding, and that could be a key element of this employer value proposition. So the way the organization cared, yes, they had to let people go, but in some situations they don't have the choice. But there was still a care factor here, which our company A didn't have. Mm-hmm. So from an employer value proposition, all the care that the organization has for their employees is kind of going to make the work very easy. At least that's my views. I would definitely be a lot more comfortable applying or rejoining an organization that has showed care than an organization that did not. And from a talent acquisition perspective, it's really using this strength, which is a the care factor in the way they promote the organization, the way they tailor their job adverts, the way they encourage people who work for the organization to become huge advocates of the organization and talk about the organization and all the care factor. I think that's what I would recommend the HR team and the organization to do.
Alana?
So I think, you know, as Jerome said, this is a much more fortunate position to be starting from. But I think also, let's be realistic, that probably a lot of organisations aren't starting from this point. So the one thing that I think is important in both in case study A and this study is also this emotional experience. So, you know, I think of emotions are like that highlighter pen, right, that emphasises the experience in your brain so we remember. And research actually tells us that when that experience elicits a really strong emotional response, so whether that's positive or negative, we're actually a lot more likely to remember it.
Yeah.
So I think then what's really important to be thinking about as we're designing what is this kind of reboarding experience look like is what are the moments that we are absolutely going to nail and we're going to get that experience really right so that we elicit that right emotional response so that our employees are remembering that. You know, I think in terms of practicality is there's some things here around experience in terms of managing expectations that would be really important from my perspective around what does a business look like today versus what it did, you know, 3-4 months ago. So what might that mean for you coming back into this business if that's something that you want to do? Remembering that experience, the more that we can guide our employees around what to expect, the better their experience is going to be. So I think that would be one thing definitely to consider. And then I think about, you know, what's the process, the practical process at which you're going to, you know, re-engage talent. So is it that you go through a process first of engaging with your recent employees that have left your business so they kind of get this preferential treatment, and what does the experience of that look like before then you open up opportunities just to kind of the broader talent market? But again, I think for both of these case studies is really putting that lens over what is the emotional experience that we want to create and start to take ownership of how we guide our employees through that emotional experience rather than allowing that just to kind of, you know, free for all, so to speak.
I couldn't agree. Yeah. You go.
Just a quick thing. Again, when we compare company A and company B, I think that company B, who's managed it to be a bit better, would probably be more likely to attract the best talent out of all. Company A will, people will always apply for them, whether they get the best talent out of it. That'll be a big question. So, and that's something that we'll probably witness in 12, 18 months. But I think that gives them, company B probably has a bit of a competitive advantage on company A.
Yeah, totally agree. Maybe that's an output of this session. We go away and we devise some kind of research and then come back for a follow-up. So just to, I suppose on my side, kind of similar to what you said, Alana, trust is a big thing. And I think that's a big component of the emotional experience, right? So if company B have let their employees go, how do you rebuild that trust is a big one. Jem's just put in the chat, you also need to think about the current legal framework, right? So in the UK, there are loads of legalities around rehiring people and repaying any kind of redundancy package. So that's a practical implication. The other one I think is how do you prioritize who you bring back, because that could also go against you, right? So if you're reaching out to your alumni pool and you're like, hey, we've got 5 positions, we let 15 people go, how do you prioritize that? And I know that, you know, not everyone was from the same position, but you do need to think about that.
Absolutely.
I think the thing around trust, and if we look at that employee experience piece, right, is that reboarding aspect or onboarding as well for new employees. We have to look at what does that first 3 months, maybe 6 months look like, and how do we help to build trust? So what do we currently do in that onboarding process that allows new employees to build relationships with us as a company? How do we revisit that to make sure that we're also factoring in moments that allow us to build trust with that employee again or for the first time? And that will be probably, that's my view, that company B, that's something to really consider, is how do we build trust? And almost as well, we need to think about how do we incentivize people to come back, right? Because as much as it might have been a good experience, people are very proud. Are they going to want to be coming back? What opportunities are they going for? Business the same. I don't know. Just in the chat here. So yeah, Matthew's just raising that again. Many businesses don't allow to come back for a specified period of time. So does that then open up the floor to freelancing or with your old organisation?
Yes.
What do you guys think?
Yeah, well, I think we'll see a real increase in the gig economy. I think that, people, and I think there'll be a mixture of people that have been, retrenched through this experience that will choose to want to work a bit more flexibly. But I think also there'll be a level of risk that organisations are nervous about rehiring people permanently, just given, the fragile state of our economy. So I do see that we'll really see this uptick in, and which for me then I think actually begs a whole different question, which is what is the experience that you give to your permanent workforce versus your contingent workforce? We know that, historically in a lot of organisations they are quite different, and, the contingent workforce has been treated somewhat different to the permanent workforce. This will start to see the merge of those, I think really quickly. So, how do we start to have a look at what is the experience design for all people in our organisations? And I just wanted to comment, Sasha, on your comment re trust, because I think, we've seen this year, certainly in Australia, with the latest Elderman Trust Barometer that was released, that right now, and I think this is global, I think it's just isolated to Australia, it's the lowest levels of trust we've ever seen from people and governments. And actually where people are trusting more is their business. So trusting for sources of information. So even through COVID, which, they did another piece of research post-COVID. But in Australia, post the big bushfires that we had, and then COVID, people are seeking information through their employers rather than media outlets or government. I mean, that speaks volumes, right? So if you think about then the person who I trust the most has just retrenched me, you can imagine the emotional state of people, when they're seeking new opportunities. I think it's a really important consideration when we think about the experience design.
Yeah, I think it's funny, but I think across what we've all shared, onboarding is a big one from an experience perspective, and being emotionally aware of what your employees are going through, or your new employees, the reboarding experience of people coming back from furlough, not just retrenchment, and then the offboarding piece, which I do think is neglected, and I'm sure people would agree.
Yeah,
we think offboarding, have a really good, give your laptop back, have a good lunch with your manager before you go, but really it's so much more than that.
Absolutely.
So I'm looking in the comments as well. So Jerome, I'm gonna throw this question your way. So Amit's just said, imagine a new hire and a rehire joining on the same day at company B. What would the new hire experience be as soon as the rehire introduces her or himself?
Yeah, before I get there, I'm just going to make a point about your the offboarding, and totally agree. This is this is part of the experience that an employee should have. And when you look at the organization who had to furlough people, followed by redundancies and all these kind of things, these people never had this experience of saying goodbye to their colleagues.
Yeah.
And then they almost get expected to come back eventually, or it's just like, well, how does that work? How does the employee feel about it?
Yeah.
So I think that's something that got taken away from the experience that the employee was expecting from the organization, which isn't a great thing. But back to Amit's question, so new hire meeting with a rehire in company B. Look, I don't think the discussion will be a bad one. If there's a rehire, surely this person thinks highly of the organization because they were willing to go back. So I don't think it would be a bad discussion or a bad meeting. They could only be positive. I mean, the person decided to rejoin. So reasons for the right reason, you wouldn't rejoin just because that's good money, for instance. You would rejoin because you really believe in the organization, in the culture, in the leadership, and the strategy going ahead. So I think it could be very interesting, and there's a lot of knowledge that could be shared between the rehire and the new hire, which is also something that organizations need. They need this institutional knowledge that a lot of them will have lost with the retrenchments and other other processes to lose people.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
totally agree. I think, so conscious of time, I think maybe we can kind of pivot the conversation a little bit to, you know, what would be your top tip for HR leaders and those on the call looking at incorporating employee experience design into employer branding or talent acquisition strategy going forward? Given all of the challenges we've explored, what would you say people should be focusing on? So Alana, I don't know if you want to go first.
Yeah, sure. I think, look, to keep it really simple, which is my preferred approach, is how do you want to make people feel? You know, it doesn't go beyond that. And I think, you know, if you use that as a lens of how you present yourself as a business in a way that is really authentically aligned to your business purpose, you know, your values and what you stand for as an organization. You know, and the reason I separate the purpose and what you stand for is that they can be slightly different things in organization. You know, we talk about them slightly differently. I don't think you can go wrong. You know, I don't, but you know, to you know, my point where we were discussing case study A is be realistic in how that is reflected from a branding perspective. You know, don't, you know, excuse my language, roll shit and glitter, you know. So if there's stuff that needs to be faced, then face that music. But I think do it in a way that's really authentic to your brand, and that people can connect with. You know, don't underestimate the value of using the people in your business to share the strengths of your organization and the challenges and how they've overcome those, but again in a way that's really realistic. So that'd be my top tip.
Awesome. I totally agree, by the way, on the don't sweep it under the carpet. Let's not pretend. I also think, kind of leading on from that point, it's a really good thing from a HR perspective to understand what the CX strategy is going to be as well. So what is the customer acquisition strategy going to be? So people are spending less. There's an economic crisis going on as well. What are we as an organization doing with our brand to acquire new customers? And take those principles and apply them to employer acquisition strategy as well. That's a great starting point. I think that's just a little tip in there as well. But Jerome, what do you think? What's your tip?
Look, interestingly, I don't think that employee experience should be a HR kind of responsibility. I think employee experience is a responsibility of the whole business from the very top. So thinking board, CEO, top leadership team, all the way to the employees that are down the chain. I think it's everybody's responsibility. It shouldn't even sit within HR, because employee experience should inform HR and some of the processes and rules that are developed, as opposed to the other way around. But one of the key tip will be to really listen to employees and what they have to say, how they feel on an ongoing basis. We shouldn't keep on doing this yearly engagement survey. That's not really relevant. So you do an engagement survey around like June, July time, you get the results in December. By the time you get the results, people would have forgotten about it. We don't implement any changes. We need to listen to employees on an ongoing basis, like a heartbeat. Your employees are your heart. If it doesn't beat right, if it stops beating, there is something wrong, and you need to fix it straight away instead of waiting for a year for your next survey. That should be an ongoing process. But also putting more accountability on the leaders, on the leadership, on the board, and make sure that there's ongoing monitoring and also reporting on this heartbeat of the organization. So the board can make the right decision, and if they feel that the leadership team is not right, then that's their role to make changes.
Totally agree. And I think, I guess my nugget of advice would be, and it goes to Phil's question as well in the comments here, which is communication and the role of communication. I think we talked about this one probably a couple of months ago. That was the hot topic of like, how do we get consistent comms out to our employees? How do we reduce that anxiety by providing consistent communications? And I think this does link to the point I'd make, which is don't overlook that holistic employee experience when looking at talent acquisition. Because there's one thing, you know, building a really great employer brand strategy, but when people get in, it's about retention, and it's about making sure that they made the right decision. And I think a big part of that in the remote world of work is, you know, how are you communicating with your employees, and what tools are you giving them to be productive? So I sway more towards that digital employee experience within my line of work, but I think it's absolutely critical. So candidate experience, how have we made that seamless and as pleasant as possible given the anxieties, the onboarding experience, and then the holistic employee experience. So take the time and look at it end to end and ask challenging questions, like you say, Jerome. Get in front of the leaders, make sure they're being held to account as well over the EX strategy.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Alana.
I just wanted to add a couple of things. Sasha, to your point there, and I could talk for days on this, is the role of the leader in all of this, right? And so I don't think we can underestimate, you know, we can all design amazing experiences in our organisations, but if our leaders aren't accountable for playing a role in how they're actually executed, then it's another process, right? So I think we can't underestimate that. And I think, you know, Phil, to your comment around, you know, how do you ensure that the communication is flowing, is, I think, as an organisation, the one thing, a bit of work that I've been doing with some clients is getting really clear around what are the non-negotiables from an information flow perspective, and who's responsible for that. So what are the mediums we use? So email, Slack, you know, chats in Zoom calls, whatever whatever the mediums are that you use in your organisation. What do we use for what purpose? Whose responsibility is it to share the message? And actually, is it just the leader's role that's got a responsibility for communicating? So, you know, what role can we as employees play in that communication where it's appropriate, so that actually we're not just waiting for our leader to do everything. You know, we're seeing this real shift, you know, from an organisational design perspective to self-managed teams. And, you know, information flow is critical to those teams actually being able to manage themselves in the absence of a leader. So, you know, what does that mean? I think that's even more important now in this remote work, because you're not always going to have that visibility of your leader.
Yeah.
The other thing I just wanted to kind of wind back a couple of comments earlier was the CX piece. So I just couldn't agree more. And I think what's really interesting is that there are so many great frameworks and principles that we use from a consumer marketing perspective that we need to start thinking about from an employee marketing perspective.
Yeah.
You know, the 4 Ps of marketing, you know, product, price, promotion, place, they all apply with a lens of the human. You know, emotion in brand marketing has been prevalent for decades. You know, how do we want someone to feel when they see that advert, you know, of that chocolate bar? They want to feel like, oh my God, that's amazing, let me go buy some. So how does that translate from a branding perspective? So I think we could learn a lot also by partnering closely with our marketing functions to talk about how are you selling to our business brand, particularly for those that are in kind of, you know, retail e-commerce spaces. And then what does that mean from an employer brand perspective? So yeah, that was just a couple of points I wanted to share.
Absolutely. I think the consumer brand and learning from what's happening in the consumer space for the consumer brand is very important, and ensuring that it's well aligned with employee experience. Now, where organization that thinks that their consumer brand is strong enough to reattract or attract talent, nowadays, post-COVID, is probably not relevant anymore. I think organizations need more than just a strong consumer brand, and think it's just good enough is probably very unrealistic.
Yeah.
So aligning the two, a great consumer brand is great, but a great employer brand is even better. So yeah, that's kind of some remarks, and ensuring that organization evolve. And when you look at organizations like Kodak, like years ago, they didn't transform because they thought their consumer brand was strong enough. They had very little product, and they went bankrupt. And organizations that have this mindset, thinking they're strong enough because of a strong consumer brand, are not safe anymore, because employees play a key and significant role in their survival.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I totally agree. And I think as well, I'm conscious we're coming up on time. This is going to be 45 minutes, but we knew that we would want to talk even more. So we'll get to the closing section. But, you know, I do think there needs to be, I agree with you, Jerome, like, you know, your customer brand is not enough to sustain your organization. And you do have to look at your employer brand, and that experience is a huge part of that. I think there have been some really great organizations that have done well. You know, I know a few tech companies, I'll refrain from mentioning, as we said, we'll try and avoid mentioning companies specifically, that have really rallied around their employees, and, you know, in the same way that they're supporting their customers with, you know, free tools that they've developed to get them through COVID, they're also sending their employees hampers, and they're committing to not making redundancies, you know. And then on the flip side, you've got organizations, and I'm not bashing, but it makes me cringe a little bit, that are putting out customer commercials that say we're going to get through this together, and in the back end cutting 1 million jobs and saying actually we're not doing this together. So I think that consistency is just
there's a question in the Q&A here around you know, that you know, EX should be a whole business strategy, so agreeing with what we've mentioned, going beyond HR, and that, you know, they're aligning the brand vision to engage employees, and asking, you know, who's doing this well. I will name one because we're all very familiar with that, and I think that's Airbnb. Have done a spectacular job managing their business and their employees through this change. You know, and I've listened to a number of podcasts, you know, from the founder of those business since, you know, COVID has hit, and, you know, they've had to reach into their pocket, and it's okay, I know their pockets are relatively deep, to keep their customers happy as well as their employees happy. Now, businesses could choose to approach that really quite harshly, right? So, you know, I think you know, they saw this opportunity to really honour the values of their business, you know, in times of crisis. Now, we always talk about, I think about from a leadership perspective, we always talk about, you know, who do you show up in times of crisis? I think Airbnb have done a spectacular job in really honouring their brand as a consumer, but also as an employee.
Yeah. And I can think of Southwest as well in the US, because it's all about the care for customers, but also care for employees. And during COVID, that was like very clear on how they cared for people, whether their customers or their employees, and they stayed very true to what their purpose and values are.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. Wow, really great conversation. I do think we could talk for about 3 hours about this. And if it were late in the afternoon, we could do it over wine, but we're not. It's still up, I promise. So let me just share the quick closing slide. And a big thanks to everyone for engaging in the chat, like really awesome points and questions as well. So a huge thank you to all of you. I hope this has been useful and enjoyable. And a big thanks to Alana and Jerome. You're my two favourite EX people and really great friends as well. So it's so great to have this chat with you. So thanks so much. I've got
Thanks, Sasha.
No worries. I've got 2 QR codes here. So feel free to grab your phone and quickly give these a swipe with your camera. Is that what you say about a QR code? I don't know. Who knows? But make sure you're following the Workflow LinkedIn page, which is the one on the right here. We have more events like these coming up. So next month, we'll be talking about the return to work experience for working mums and what some of the challenges are around that, because that's an area that's pretty unexplored. And then we'll also be looking in November at how your employee experience influences your diversity and inclusion initiatives. And I'll be doing that with Jem, who has joined us today as an attendee. And yeah, look out for the post-discussion survey. A huge thank you. And this recording will be available probably over the next couple of days. So thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. And yeah, have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Sasha.
Thanks
Alana.
Bye.